Welcome to the official launching of the National Inclusive Open Educational Resources IOER policy. The ceremony will begin with the singing of Malaysian national anthem, Negaraku. In order to seek blessings for our event today, allow me to invite Dr. Muhammad Nasir bin Masrum, Deputy Director of the Islamic Center in University Technology Malaysia, to lead the recitation of dua.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirrabbilalamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin asrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, we gather in this blessed day with full devotion and humble. We seek your blessing and guidance so that we are endowed with health, strength, determination, consistent and trust in carrying out the task entrusted. Ya Zal Jalali wal Ikram, who control all greatness and glory, please bestow this National Inclusive Open Education Resources Policy launch ceremony with your grace and protection. May this make this ceremony beneficial to all of us and avoid this ceremony from any danger and negligence. Allahumma alimul ghaibi wa shahadah. Bless our effort to preserve knowledge to all mankind, so that they get knowledge and guidance in illuminating life and seeking the truth. Simplify our task to share knowledge resources as a catalyst for a cultivating of knowledge throughout the country. Allahumma ya mujibas sa'ilin, make us a knowledgeable and progressive nation, respect scholars, diligent in reading and research, love information and dedicate to society and the country. Do enlighten our heart and mind to receive knowledge, information and guidance. Make us noble person who can lead the civilized society. Allahumma aftah alayna hikmataka wanshur alayna min khazaini bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hadza jam'an marhuma wa tafurraqana min ba'dihi tafarruqan ma'suma. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azaban nar. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa baraka wassalam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Amin, amin, ya Rabbal Alamin. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad Nasir. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh and greetings. First of all, I would like to welcome and acknowledge our distinguished guests. Yang berhormat Datuk Seri Dr. Noraini Ahmad, Minister of Higher Education, Malaysia. Yang berhormat Senator Datuk Dr. Ahmad Masrizal bin Muhammad, Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Malaysia. Dr. Taufik Jalasi, UNESCO Assistant Director General for Communication and Information. Dr. Sanjaya Mishra, Education Specialist in E-Learning, Commonwealth of Learning. Mr. Jawi Hironaka, Program Specialist, Digital Innovation and Transformation, Communication and Information Sector, UNESCO. Professor Rory McGreal, Chair in Open Educational Resources, UNESCO International Council for Open and Distance Education at Athabasca University. Yang Berusaha Dr. Muhammad Zabri bin Yusuf, Deputy Secretary General, Ministry of Higher Education, Malaysia. Yang Berbahagia Profesor Datuk Dr. Husaini bin Omar, Director General of Higher Education, Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Higher Education, Malaysia. Yang Berusaha Teknologis Zainab binti Ahmad, Director General of Polytechnic and Community College Education, Department of Polytechnic and Community College Education, Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizer, I would like to welcome all of you to this virtual event for the official launching of National Inclusive Open Educational Resources IOER policy. For your information, the IOER policy is the first in the world which encompasses the ability differences in the preparation of open educational resources OER. This policy encourages the creation of OER by considering the needs across physical and mental capabilities, gender, age and socio-economic status. To start the event, allow me to invite Dr. Taufik Jalasi, the UNESCO Assistant Director General for Communication and Information, for the opening speech.
Your Excellency Dr. Noraini Ahmad, Minister of Higher Education of Malaysia, Dr. Wan Zuhainis, Director of the Academic Excellence Division of the Ministry of Higher Education, Dr. Nurbiha, President of the Malaysian E-Learning Council for Public Universities, dear UNESCO partners and Open Education Resource Funds. This month, Malaysia's representative to the 41st session of UNESCO General Conference, His Excellency Dr. Radzi Jidin, Senior Minister of Education and Higher Education, announced the finalization of Malaysia's national policy on inclusive open educational resources. Today, I take sincere pleasure in participating in the official launch of this new national policy for Malaysia. Malaysia's inclusive OER policy is a first of its kind in national level public policy setting. It's unique in that it reinforces the role of open educational resources in building more inclusive and equitable access to quality education, specifically for persons with disabilities. Around the world, the increased adoption of open educational resources has been shown to support a more inclusive access to affordable educational resources, as well as to improve the quality of learning outcomes. Persons with disabilities are the world's largest minority, accounting for about 15% of the global population. Only 2 years ago, in November 2019, the 193 member states of UNESCO 40th General Conference adopted the UNESCO recommendation on open educational resources, which calls upon all member states to develop supportive policy to encourage inclusive and equitable quality OER. The government of Malaysia was one of the leaders of a multi-stakeholder and global consultation that led to the adoption of this important international standard-setting framework of the United Nations system. The Malaysian government's commitment included hosting the Asian Regional Consultation on OER, organized in Kuala Lumpur in December 2016, which introduced wide-ranging inputs to the 2017 World OER Congress and its Ljubljana Action Plan. This action plan, in turn, was a cornerstone for developing and adopting the 2019 UNESCO OER recommendation. Today, Malaysia again takes a lead internationally by adopting a national policy on inclusive OER. This inclusive OER national policy is the result of a truly multi-stakeholder consultation, which was 2 years in the making. The process included consultations with all national universities in Malaysia, with the heads and experts of the leading organizations and institutions working with persons with disabilities, and on inclusive education in Malaysia. It also involved the leading international experts on OER and universal design for learning. The UNESCO Secretariat wishes to thank Dr. Fong Soon Fook and his colleagues at the University Malaysia Sabah for a leading role in developing with UNESCO this inclusive and multi-stakeholder approach. I wish also to thank national and international partners, including the Malaysian E-Learning Council for Public Universities, the Malaysia Center for E-Learning, the Department of Higher Education of the Ministry of Higher Education, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. A well-designed consultation process has yielded promising results for the global OER community. Indeed, the quality of the policy language in Malaysia's inclusive OER national policy and the highly inclusive process used to develop this text should be used as a model to support other OER stakeholders and policymakers, both downstream and internationally. I thank the Ministry of Higher Education of Malaysia for its support in endorsing this landmark national policy and for its commitment to ensuring the policy's full implementation. In the spirit of transforming this important policy into reality and of making the ongoing digital transformation process more inclusive, UNESCO stands by your side. Let me wish you all every success in this endeavor. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taufik, for the opening speech. Next is the time that we have been waiting for in order to officially launch the National IOER Policy. Allow me to invite Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Dr. Noraini Ahmad, Minister of Higher Education Malaysia, to give a speech and share her aspirations.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and warm greetings. Senator Dr. Ahmad Masrizal Muhammad, Deputy Minister of Higher Education Malaysia, Dr. Taufik Jalasi, Assistant Director General for Communication and Information, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, Mr. Joe Hironaka, Program Specialist for Digital Innovation and Transformation, Communication and Information Sector, UNESCO, Dr. Sanjaya Mishra, Education Specialist in E-Learning Commonwealth of Learning, Professor Rory McGreal, Chair of the Open Educational Resources UNESCO International Council for Open and Distance Education, Athabasca University, Dr. Muhammad Zabri Yusof, Deputy Secretary General, Ministry of Higher Education Malaysia, Professor Dr. Husaini Omar, Director General of Higher Education, Technologist Zainab Ahmad, Director General of Polytechnic and Community College, Education Department Malaysia, University representatives, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted and honored to be with you today for the launching ceremony of the Inclusive Open Educational Resources Policy, the very first policy to address the issue of accessibility of those with disabilities in education. Allow me to begin by sharing with you the background which led to the development of this policy. During the 40th session of the UNESCO General Conference in 2019, UNESCO member states adopted the UNESCO OER Recommendation 2019. The member states were called upon to undertake actions in these 5 areas. First, building capacity of stakeholders to create, access, reuse, adapt, and redistribute OER. Second, developing supportive policy. Third, encouraging inclusive and equitable quality OER. Fourth, nurturing the creation of sustainability models for OER. And finally, facilitating international cooperations. The UNESCO OER Recommendations 2019 supports the mainstreaming of open educational resources to assist all member states in the creation of inclusive knowledge societies with the long-term objective of achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda through 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The fourth SDG on education is essential in achieving the other SDGs. It specifically aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. The Education 2030 Framework for Action provides guidelines for the implementation of this goal and its commitments. And Malaysia is committed to bring the OER Recommendation 2019 to the attention of the authorities responsible for education and research in relevant ministries and departments. Since 2019, the Malaysian Ministry of Higher Education, through the Academic Excellence Division, higher education institutions, and various agencies, have contributed to the design and development of the national IOER policy. It is important to acknowledge that IOER project was coordinated by UNESCO's appointed consultant, Professor Dr. Fong Sun Fook of University Malaysia Sabah and Mr. Joe Hironaka of UNESCO Paris. The IOER policy is in alignment to several important documents such as the Ljubljana Declaration 2017, the Paris OER Declaration 2012, Commonwealth of Learning Institutional OER Policy Template 2016, Malaysia Education Blueprints and Malaysia Education Act, Articles 40 and 41. The policy is meant to provide an inclusive learning experience with content, activities, and resources that are adaptable to everyone's unique needs with minimal barriers. More than 500,000 individuals in Malaysia are currently registered as disabled, challenged with visual, auditory, speech, physical, or cognitive limitations. To address their needs, the IOER is envisioned to be applied in education to enable all learners, particularly those with disabilities, to learn according to their individual learning styles and preferences. This will help to promote long-term inclusion into wider society of learners with disabilities, particularly through the enhancement of social inclusion and employment opportunities. The national IOER policy is expected to provide direction in the design, development, and the use of inclusive open educational resources to increase access and support quality learning and teaching for all learners in Malaysian institutions under Creative Commons licenses. Ladies and gentlemen, the Malaysian government will promote and implement the IOER that permits no-cost access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, and redistribution by others within an open licensing framework. At the same time, education institutions will need to develop their respective policy documents to support IOER in alignment with the national IOER policy, taking into consideration their specific needs and resources. The institutions should also play their role in implementing the policy through various actions, such as reviewing course design and development, publishing the IOER policy in consultation with relevant content providers, and implementing suitable IOER activities. The design and delivery of IOER should be universal and flexible through the adoption of assistive as well as information communication technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite everyone to ponder on how we can build capacity, encourage effective, inclusive, and equitable access to quality IOER, and how we can promote as well as reinforce international cooperation to create an inclusive education climate. Before I end, I would like to express my gratitude to all who have contributed to the development of national IOER policy. Together, we can make the vision of an inclusive education a reality in Malaysia. On that note, I hereby officiate the National Inclusive Open Educational Resources Policy. Thank you very much.
I think one of the most prominent challenges that I have to face is the lack of online source material, especially during online teaching and learning, where we as students are highly relying on online materials to help us with our researches and also our study in general. I would really love to have more academic textbooks such as ebooks or journals or even lectures notes to be made available and easily accessible for us. I really hope that the society in general will have better understanding and more awareness towards people with disabilities. It is important to note that different disabilities require different needs and specific care and attention. So I really wish that all the online materials will cater to the specific needs of all disabilities.
The education must be very inclusive, not exclusive for the blind.
We need to actually look into our systems and our regulations and see whether or not there are components which are actually discriminatory. Yeah? And we need to remove them in order to make it inclusive.
They can have access to the material from the internet 24/7. So learning can happen now just in time, just enough and very personalized just for me.
Because in our research, people with learning disability should be included in policy drafting.
It is our sincere hope that the IOER policy will serve as a catalyst for the manifestation of inclusivity in Malaysia, and a significant step forward to foster greater accessibility and inclusive education for all, in particular, learners with disabilities.
Dear friends in Malaysia, and Your Excellency, Madam the Minister, 2 years ago, when this inclusive OER project was first conceived, I was reminded many times that a policy on OER is highly difficult to achieve at any national level. But I soon also realized, through my experience in Malaysia, that the unique strengths of our community, the OER and disabilities communities, are the people. In our community, sharing knowledge is innate and human. In Malaysia, working together with Dr. Fong Soon Fook and his colleagues, we tried something a bit different. We brought together two separate but powerful global forces: the movement for full and fair inclusion of persons with disabilities in higher education, and the open education movement. Since the first UNESCO World Conference in 2005, open licensing has grown from more than 50 million Creative Commons licenses online to more than 1.5 billion by the time that the UNESCO OER recommendation was unanimously adopted in 2019. Our population of persons with disabilities today exceeds 1 billion, including family and loved ones, as well as some of the greatest minds of our generation. Today is a day to celebrate with the wonderful professionals in Malaysia who contributed to the world's first national inclusive OER policy. And now, with the further support of the Ministry of Higher Education and UNESCO's continued support, please be our champions for an inclusive OER movement, both in Malaysia and around the world. Thank you.
Malaysia has taken leadership role, and I congratulate the leaders, officials, policymakers and OER practitioners in Malaysia for their vision and commitment to creating an accessible and equitable world for all. At Commonwealth Learning, we look forward to the implementation of the policy and support OER projects in Malaysia and provide expertise needed to achieve the results expected in the policy.
We know that there are a growing number of learners, more than 100 million are expected, of learners who are capable of post-secondary education and without help will not be able to receive it. And we do know that open educational resources are one way that we can help to ensure that learners can receive the education, especially post-secondary education, that they need. This is in support of the UNESCO Strategic Development Goal for Education for All. And I greatly support and congratulate you all in Malaysia for supporting this policy to ensure that open educational resources enable students to access quality educational materials for everyone. And I'd like to thank Dr. Fong Soon Fook for his support in this when I met him and have communicated with him in the last years. So congratulations to everybody in Malaysia. It is a great service to the world that you are doing by going ahead with this policy. Thank you once again.
For many years, persons with disabilities has been denied access to information through inaccessible and unfriendly formats. The National Council for the Blind Malaysia (NCBM) applaud the adoption of the National Open Education Resources Policy, which we believe will empower persons with disabilities to be included into society.
University Malaysia Sabah, UMS, is honored to be one of the key parties involved in the design and development of the Inclusive Open Educational Resources (IOER) policy, which was formulated under the guidance of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization UNESCO, the Commonwealth of Learning, Academic Excellence Division, Department of Higher Education Malaysia, Ministry of Higher Education, Malaysian E-Learning Council for Public Universities, the Malaysia Centre for E-Learning (MyCell), public and private universities in Malaysia, as well as reviewers from the international communities. All of this was made possible with the generous financial support of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. UMS is committed to inclusivity in education and to design and development of open educational resources (OER) to support this policy. Our commitment is reflected in our Open Education Resources (OER) repository, which hosts more than 500 digital teaching and learning material that has been distributed under the Creative Commons licenses and can be accessed by the public across the world. The UMS OER repository is growing steadily as an indication of our resolve to become a leader in OERs and contribute to sustainable development goals. The development of the IOER policy was initiated by Professor Dr. Fong Sun Fook, UNESCO consultant, and his dedicated team in mid-2019. The draft document was subjected to several rounds of consultation with the key stakeholders, which included the different ministries, differently able persons, educational institutions, public policy groups, and panels of experts from across the world. UMS congratulates the Ministry of Higher Education on the launch of this key document, National Inclusive Open Educational Resources Policy (IOER), which will transform the life and abilities of everyone, in particular the differently able individual in Malaysia, by giving them access to educational resources that are vital to the inclusion in society and the contribution to the greater goods of humanity.
With that, it is the end of our event today. Again, we would like to thank Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Dr. Noraini Ahmad, Minister of Higher Education Malaysia, for officially launching our national IOER policy. Also, thank you very much to the respected invitees and the rest of our audience for supporting our event today. We hope that the launch of the IOER policy will help in the development of open educational resources which are more inclusive to cater students with disabilities by not only the education institutions in Malaysia but also around the globe. Thank you and have a nice day.